This is the story of an Irish charity race, and yet is part of the story of the racehorse in Ireland, a story of our equestrian history and heritage, a story of teaching and learning, in a discipline that without racing fitness can literally take your breath away. A skill that expects your full attention, and where danger can strike like lightning. So this is my journey, my story of the final furlong. In my teenage years, I spent some time riding out racehorses in a small yard in Wicklow. But time moves on. When I was 26, I started my own food business with my brother. Built a house when I was 33. Got married when I was 34. And started a family when I was 36.
And now I am 52. But I always felt I had unfinished business with a thoroughbred. And one day a fellow told me about the annual Punchestown charity race, which was organised by a butcher from Kilcullen called James Nolan. But I had my doubts. I felt perhaps I was too old, too stale, too unfit. Reading a book, and in this book there was a story about a magazine in Paris in 1922 which posed a question to its readers, which was, what would happen if the world was going to come to a sudden and shocking end? And most people replied with their letters that either churches would fill up or bedrooms would fill up. But one writer called Marcel Proust gave the following reply.
I think that life would suddenly seem wonderful to us if we were threatened to die, as you say. Just think of how many projects, travels, love affairs, studies, our life, hides from us. Made invisible by our laziness, which certain of future delays them incessantly. It would have been enough to think that we are human, and that death may come this evening.
And so I would have to contact James Nolan. Either that or buy a red sports car.
I caught up with James Nolan at an information talk on the race. James himself was a veteran of the race, having won it on one occasion. The race is in aid of the Punchestown Kidney Research Fund, of which James has his own personal story, of which I will tell again. In essence, each rider has to pass a riding assessment, medical evaluation, and also find their own racehorse. That is, to beg, borrow or steal one. Each rider also has to raise €1,500 in sponsorship. But James is passionate about the charity and finishes by making this point.
For me, the money is one thing. The awareness is probably the most important. The name of the race says it all. Have the conversation, say yes to organ donation.
But finding a yard would be harder than I had expected. I had tried 5 yards with email and phone calls, and over the course of a few weeks I waited for word without success. You see, I had limited connections, and to make matters worse, the bank manager had said no to the loan for a Ferrari. So I had all but given up. But by chance at Punchestown races on New Year's Eve, I ran into the old friend I had ridden out for all those years ago. John Slater had been a leading jockey in the 1980s, and I had joined him in his first year of training. He had trained my dad's mare and went on to claim victory with her at Goran point-to-point in 1999. When I told him my predicament, he thought for a minute and then said, "O'Dwyer, Conor O'Dwyer is your man. Give me your number and leave it with me." 2 days later he rang me to tell me it was all arranged. He told Conor I was fairly handy on a horse, and had school for him over fences too. Oh dear, I thought. John had bigged me up. He told me to contact Conor's son Charlie, who was the yard's jockey. Charlie was quick to tell me that I was welcome to ride out, but at the outset they'd have no horse for me for the charity race.
But for the moment, that didn't matter because I was back riding out.
I'm a recreational rider, jumping the odd rustic and coloured pole, following the hounds on occasion. But now I was joining a small team of fit professional riders, and as it was midway into the national hunt season, this meant a yard full of fit racehorses, so bragging about big ditches or coloured poles I had jumped mattered little here. I was going from driving one of these to trying to drive one of these.
At the beginning of January 2023, I travelled to the Curragh stables of Conor O'Dwyer. Conor began training in 2008, having had a successful riding career that included 2 Cheltenham Gold Cups and 2 Cheltenham Champion Hurdles. Since then, he had set up a dual-purpose yard that is for national hunt or steeplechase jumpers and flat horses. He is based right on the edge of the Curragh, enabling full access to the extensive Curragh training facility, and so it was that my training began.
First thing you do is visit the tack room. Here you collect your bridle, saddle cloth, numnah, quarter sheet, saddle pad, breast girth and girth sock. Then you check the board for the horses or lots you are to ride. After you find out who you're riding, then you have to find your horse. In the O'Dwyer yard this is not hard, as all the horses have nameplates, which to me shows great attention to detail. But in many there are none, and you get vague directions to your horse, and I once tacked up the wrong horse, who turned out not to have been actually broken yet. And now, as the occasional horseman, familiar with the most basic snaffle bridle, I had a steep learning curve to make as I walked around checking the names. All my tack seemed to get twisted and turned. Reins caught backwards in martingales had to be figured out. All the while the other riders had loaded the horse walker and tacked up in the time I had just put my saddle on. As the crew are just loading their horses, all this adds to your fluster. The first lot was fine. Eddie was a gentleman, although my right leg burned with cramp. The second lot was good too, on Freddie, but now my left leg seemed to burst into flames. Then there was the third and final lot for me that day.
This horse wore a black hood, and so I nicknamed him Batman, and on the gallop he made a joker of me, pulling my arms from their sockets. But it wasn't his fault, it was mine due to my poor riding fitness. I felt I was like Shrek riding donkey, like 6 pounds of shite in a 5-pound bag. Everything was wrong with me. This, I realised, was going to be a very long journey.
At the end of the Middle Ages, the need for full armour in war had become relatively obsolete, and so too were the horses that had carried them. The new military horses of the Renaissance required speed and above all manoeuvrability. With no armour for protection, the cavalryman had always to ride his horse to present his sword arm at his enemy. It was said that in a contest on horseback, the better horseman would always beat the better swordsman. Heralding this new trend in riding, it was the fashion to copy the Italian method and the great schools of Naples.
Indeed, the Italian word maneggiare was used to describe parts of this new equestrian discipline. It means to handle, or to handle with great skill. We would import this word into the English language to mean manage or manager.
In all cases, the new must-have horse had to come from the East, that is, the Turk of the Ottoman Empire, the Barb of the Barbary coast of North Africa, or the Arab from the lands of Arabia. It became the fashion to be seen on one. Take the example of this painting of Henry, Prince of Wales from 1610. The horse's nose is straight, its mane light, the neck is fine with muscle tone. A perfectly fashionable Eastern horse. But after the painting was restored, an old war horse was discovered beneath, with Roman nose, thick neck and mane. In this case, the Renaissance had literally airbrushed the English war horse into extinction. The Duke of Newcastle said of these new horses, Spanish horses were like princes, and barbs like gentlemen in their kind. It was true that these type of Eastern horses had great powers of endurance and bred true to type, but when it came to racing, they were a little lacking, as one horseman observed in 1617. For swiftness, What nation hath brought forth that horse which hath exceeded the English? When the best Barbaries that ever were in their prime, I saw them overrun by a black hobby at Salisbury, and yet that hobby was more overrun by a horse called Valentine, which Valentine, neither in hunting or running, was ever equalled, yet was a plain bred English horse, both by sire and dam. The English Civil War of the 1640s threatened the thoroughbred. The defeated royalists, who were champions of the Eastern horse, would find their studs dispersed by the victorious Puritans, and it would take many decades for a thoroughbred to emerge from the mists of the 1600s. Research has found that approximately 160 stallions were imported from the East. 50% were Arab, 25% Turk, and 25% Barb. The most famous of these were the Darley Arabian, the Godolphin Arabian, and the Byerley Turk, the so-called foundation stallions. All modern thoroughbreds descend from these three in the male line. Most of the others either proved to have poor racing ability or their male line was lost. However, the grey colour of about 3% of thoroughbreds is traceable to two of the early imported stallions, the Brownlow Turk and Alcock's Arabian. One of the problems in the beginning of the story of the English thoroughbred was the practice of calling a horse by the same name or after its owner. The pedigree of many of these horses were committed to memory and as time went by were easily forgotten. In 1750 the Jockey Club was formed in England. James Weatherby was appointed to serve the Jockey Club as its secretary and stakeholder in 1770. In 1791, with the publication of Weatherby's General Stud Book, a definitive record of the pedigrees of approximately 400 horses became the foundation for all thoroughbred bloodstock worldwide. The General Stud Book is a record of thoroughbred breeding in Britain and Ireland and constitutes the original register of the breed. It is the world's mother stud book to which all other registers of thoroughbred breeding across the globe trace their ancestry and format. Weatherby's continue to record all the foals born in Britain and Ireland, thereby sustaining an unbroken 30-generation record of the breed. It is said the aim of a good horse breeder is not just to maintain a breed, but to improve it. So selective breeding for speed and racing ability led to improvements in the size of horses and winning times by the middle of the 1800s. Bay Middleton, a winner of the Epsom Derby, stood over 16 hands high, a full hand higher than his grandsire the Darley Arabian. Winning times had improved to such a degree that many felt further improvement by additional Arabian bloodlines was impossible. This argument was borne out in 1885 when a race was held between a thoroughbred, Iambic, considered a mid-grade runner, and the best Arabian at the time, Aisel.
This race was run over 3 miles and Iambic beat Aisel by 20 lengths. But what's incredible about this race is the fact that Iambic actually carried a 4.5 stone handicap or penalty against Aisel.
England had made a new breed of horse, but it was the Irish who would make a new type of racing. But the establishment described this new type of racing as, quote, a bastard amusement to the legitimate turf. Once the preserve of medieval nobility, hunting on horses had become popular in Ireland in the 1700s.
The introduction of the Enclosures Acts to improve agricultural land in the 1700s had encouraged the use of installing fencing, growing hedges and digging ditches to try and improve land quality as part of the agricultural revolution.
This offered hunters a more challenging country to cross. This footage is from an annual hunter show in County Kildare, where modern riders and their hunters take to a course and the challenges offered in the Irish countryside.
Just sat and waited for a stride and got rewarded with a peach of a shot there. Super.
It was over such country in 1745 that two men decided to settle a bet as to who had the better horse, and they raced their horses between the steeples of 2 churches in County Cork, a distance of 4 miles. This gave birth to the steeplechase race. It also gave birth to what was known as the pounding match.
Here, hunting men would race each other across the countryside in an attempt to literally pound each other into the ground by taking on difficult obstacles. You could look on this today as being either brave or reckless.
In County Kildare in 1825, one hunter by the name of Robin Aylmer jumped an empty canal lock to pound one of his opponents. This story was told and witnessed by a newly arrived British officer at the Curragh camp, who was out with the Kildare hunt for his first day's hunting. Quote, "Amongst the local gentlemen was Robert Aylmer, and having heard so much about himself and his steed, I determined to attach myself to him as a safe guide in an unknown country, and also with the full intention of trying to equal, if not rival him if I could. I continued to follow in his wake and evinced a determination to stick to his skirts. Then he tried to bring me to grief by leading me into difficulties. He took the largest fences when he might quite as well have kept his ground by taking smaller ones, and after getting over invariably looked back to watch my proceedings. When unable to pound me, he evidently appeared disappointed, but still continued his reckless riding without being able to shake me off. We came suddenly in view of a canal as wide as a river which lay before us, the hounds following him in full cry, when Aylmer turned in his saddle and crying to me, 'Now, then for it,' dashed, to my horror, at the lock which was just before him. The horse started from a platform of roughly chiselled flag and landed safely on the other side on similar footing. A crowd of peasants gave a cheer and wished long life to his honour, and I, having pulled my horse off, stood in mute astonishment, when one of the peasants shouted, 'Bravo, Master Robin! The divil himself couldn't bait you.' The British officer then stated, 'I have since then hunted much in various countries, and never have I seen any man attempt to take such a jump as Aylmer rode over that day. And had the horse failed in covering it, inevitable death must have been the fate of both steed and rider.'
But before the formal race courses as we know them today, steeplechase races were conducted across the Irish countryside, deep in the Irish countryside, and there was a reason for this. After the wars between the Catholic and Protestant forces in Ireland, which culminated in the Battle of the Boyne in 1690, new laws were enacted by the English called the Penal Laws, introduced to control the power of Irish Catholics. One of these laws was that Catholics were not allowed to own a horse worth more than £5.
And I have told the story of one extreme example of this, of Art O'Leary, who was murdered over his horse. In the early steeplechase races, the ride across country was a journey into the unknown. Such instructions as there were regarding the line of country to be followed were of the vaguest kind. It was taken for granted that horses in steeplechases would fall at least once during the course of the race. The Sporting Magazine of April 1819 reported a steeplechase at Lismore which, quote, was a complete tumble-down race. The winner got 4 falls. In all, 12 falls, but nobody killed. The English made efforts to curb the, quote, pounding matches. To them, such contests reduced the participants to, quote, lawlessness. An act was passed in 1739 prohibiting matches and making it illegal to run any plate of less than £120 in value. Matches, however, continued to be held in spite of this. English criticism provided the spice to whet the Irish appetite. Steeplechasing was, quote, a bastard amusement as opposed to, quote, the legitimate sport of racing on the flat. A late 19th century work on the sport in England commented that, quote, as the sport grew popular it grew inferior. It was indeed the refuge of all outcasts, human and equine, from the legitimate turf. And the point-to-point races, still held in the Irish countryside today, are a testament to this tradition.
Some still argue today that national hunt or steeplechase racing is the favourite of the common people.
But the reliable and sturdy Irish hunter was outmatched by the speed and endurance of the English thoroughbred. To illustrate these distances that the national hunt thoroughbred has to race today, I climbed the Wicklow Hills to illustrate this. At magnification 20 times on my camera, and with the tiny cars crossing the causeway below, the medieval church tower highlighted, lies over 4 miles away. The distance of the longest race held in Ireland, the La Touche cross-country race held at Punchestown Racecourse each year. To compare with the flat racing world, the longest flat race is the Queen Alexandra Stakes in England and is run at Ascot each June over a distance of 2 miles 5 furlongs.
And behind me you'll see Blessington Sailing Club. That's a distance of 3 miles away. That's a distance of a steeplechase race. It's incredible when you see it in a straight line how far it really is, and that any horse that can finish such a trial is truly a hero among horses. And as for myself, I still had a date with Irish National Hunt Racing at the home of steeplechase racing in Ireland, Punchestown Racecourse in County Kildare.
My dad was a great golfer. He once played off a 4 handicap. He practiced his driving in the backfield many times a week, and one day I decided to show him what I'd got, or actually what I hadn't got. He turned to me, and I, expecting some advice, he then said, "Don't practice bad golf. Get some lessons." I sought a private lesson with Warren O'Connor, aka the Irish jockey coach in Newbridge, County Kildare, as I needed a lesson. During a riding career that spanned over 2 decades, he rode many winners around the world. He's now using that experience and knowledge to coach the next generation of riders as a fully qualified BHA jockey coach. If you skateboard or windsurf or ride a horse, the first thing you must master is balance. And the balance needed for a skateboard or windsurfer or a horse will be different. The racing seat requires a rider to use much shorter stirrups, and this requires a new type of balance for me that I'd all but forgotten. But this is not like riding a bike where it all comes back to you. A huge element comes from being riding fit, to be able to stand quietly in the stirrups. Warren showed me my faults in my riding position and how to correct them. And so it was back to the gallops to try to refine my lesson. Sometimes the lot will hack down to the nearest gallop, but generally they are boxed down to the main Curragh training area to save time. So then there was the third lot, with my old mate, the Batman. I was to ride alone, with 2 of the others just ahead of me. I was told to wait for a horse already on the gallop to pass, and as I went to circle the Batman, he suddenly reared and went vertical. He lost his balance and fell backwards. Then everything seemed to happen in slow motion. We fell onto the sand, and my left leg was pinned under him. I could even feel the heat of his belly on my leg, but he did not crush me. I looked up to see his legs near my head and waited for him to roll over me, wondering what it would be like to be crushed by him. But in that moment, he simply stepped up off me. I sprang to my feet as he trotted towards his stablemates. Jockeys will tell you that a horse will always do his best not to hurt you, as most horses are not vindictive. Later, at the yard, the lads had said that he had never done that before, and it is probable that he would never do it again, as he had given himself a fright. With the help of a nearby owner and trainer, I repositioned my slip saddle and I remounted and rode on, initially feeling somewhat macho, getting back on the horse and all that sort of thing. But my mind moved to what had just happened and how lucky I had been. It was an example of the type of danger that jockeys and work riders face every day in the course of their work, and the faith we all put in horses when our feet leave the ground and enter stirrups. I thought of the 2 children who had lost their lives in the glory of their youth in pursuit of their passion for horses. In 2021, one girl was just 15, and in 2022, a boy of 14 lost their lives. I hoped that somewhere they were riding on the gallop of eternity between the moon and the stars. As I came to finish my round, my rescuers waited for my return. And on the Curragh, there's always time for courtesy.
Thanks for the help.
This is a video about the Curragh of Kildare, and I realised that if I couldn't make it as a jockey, maybe I could make it as a singer.
He's a good lad. The winter, it has passed.
and the summers come at last, and the small birds are singing in the trees.
Winter it has passed, summer's come at last, and the birds they are singing in the trees. Their little hearts are glad, but mine is very sad. For my true love is far away from me, and it's straight I will repair to the Curragh of Kildare. For it's there I'll find tidings of my dear. Rose upon the briar, by the water running clear, gives the joy to the linnet and the bee. Their little hearts are blessed, but mine is not at rest. For my true love is absent from me, and it's straight I will repair to the Curragh of Kildare. For it's there I'll find tidings of my dear. All you that are in love and cannot it remove, I pity the pains that you endure. For experience lets me know that your hearts are full with woe, and the woe that no mortal can endure. And it's straight I will repair to the Curragh of Kildare. For it's there I'll find tidings of my dear, and it's straight I will repair to the Curragh of Kildare. For it's there.
Back at the Curragh, things were not going too well for me. I was having control issues.
And my jockey manual is quite clear about this. Two chief crimes to avoid when cantering in the string are first, getting too close to the horse in front, and second, passing the horse in front. It is bad enough getting too close to a horse when walking or trotting, but it is 100 times worse when cantering, since there is a very good chance of one's horse striking into the horse in front or otherwise injuring him.
On the left is Jamie. I'm getting too close, and if this was back in the day, my old trainer would have opened up on me with expletives like the dorsal gunner on a B-17 bomber. Another day, you can see here where I pass John. It upsets the rhythm of his horse's work. This is all red card stuff. But at least I'm not the only one that this is happening to on the gallops, because soon afterwards, someone from another string broke rank too. There were two prime suspects for this failing. One was my fitness, and the other had been diagnosed at my first simulator lesson, where my white knuckles had been observed on the reins. I was too tense in the saddle, and everyone had told me a racehorse can sense this. So while everyone was taking instruction before going to the gallops, all I could hear in my head was this. The noise of a dentist drill, and this anxiety was giving my hands the grip as though I were in a dentist's chair. This was making me take my eye off the ball. For example, not checking my girths correctly. But don't get me wrong, I was given generous advice from all of the riders. and I was determined to get over this hump. The only way forward, as far as I could see, was to improve my fitness by any means possible. If I could do this, then maybe I could work on my hands. And so at the local trad session, it was time to get some motivation on good hands. And equestrians are like good musicians. With practice, they can find those notes without even looking for them. And so, I would have to keep practicing. Many of you may be familiar with Cockney rhyming slang. For example, you have the dog and bone, apples and pears, skin and blister, and my personal favourite, the trouble and strife. But there's another one quite commonly used, which is to be on your tod, which means to be alone. This then is the beginning of the story of the American racing seat. In 1897, an American jockey named Todd Sloan came to the United Kingdom and revolutionised the world of horse racing. Instead of riding with a straight back and long stirrup leathers favoured by European riders, he squatted high in his stirrups. The British called the awkward-looking position the monkey crouch. But the new seat quickly caught on. In the past century, jockeys using Sloan's technique have improved their race times by about 6%. Now researchers have figured out why the strategy is so effective. Even as a horse and rider move forward on the flat, they also bob up and down with each stride. The researchers found that whereas a horse averaged a vertical change of 150 millimeters in each stride, the rider's vertical displacement was only about 60 millimeters. The researchers state, quote, "Jockeys don't follow the movement of the horse, but stay relatively stationary. By in effect, floating above his mount, the jockey saves the energy the horse would otherwise expend to move the rider up and down with each stride. The rider uses their legs in the short stirrups like springs or pistons." The researchers continue, quote, "It's a bit like skiing, but is very hard work. Indeed, a jockey's heart rate while racing can reach 190 beats per minute. Hence the need and challenge of being riding fit to take on a racehorse." No other change has brought about such dramatic improvements in racing speed. A biomechanics expert reported, quote, "The average times, almost 109 seconds per mile in the 1890s, fell dramatically and settled at less than 103 seconds for most of the 20th century. So it was Todd Sloan that left his mark on the English language by being alone at the front of the races he won. However, he did not invent the American seat. 2 years before Sloan rode in England, an African-American jockey named Willie Sims had ridden exactly that way, taking England's Crawford Plate at Newmarket against England's finest bolt-upright riders. But the story is told that the African-American jockeys had copied this style from the Native Americans, and that is a long way from the Curragh of Kildare.
And so after many months of riding out, I was passed as a competent rider at Race, Ireland's racing academy, with about 10 other riders.
This is located in Kildare town and trains young men and women for careers in the racing industry. The racing industry employs about 29,000 people in direct, indirect and secondary employment. There are over 8,500 horses in training. About 1.3 million people attend Irish racing at the 26 racecourses throughout Ireland. Ireland is the largest racehorse producer in Europe and the third largest in the world. But I still face two challenges. One was my riding fitness.
The other was my weight. In January I weighed just over 13 stone, but to participate in the race, which were under the rules of racing, I would have to weigh 11.5 stone or lose about 11% of my body weight. The first thing I did was to go off the beer, as we say in Ireland, or to quit alcohol. The second thing was to get on my bike.
Due to work, I only had time to ride racehorses once per week, so when I got home from work, I would ride my bike up a short hilly lane near my home upwards of 20 times every evening. Always standing on the pedals, each week I would go up a gear on the bike until in the end there were no more gears left. But my legs were getting stronger and I was much more comfortable in the saddle. Riding the 9 furlong straight became much easier, but the race would be over 15 furlongs long, about 55% more than this, and I worried if my fitness would hold on the day.
I was losing about £1 pound per week with exercise and moderate dieting, but there was a price to pay for this.
At a PR visit with other riders to a kidney treatment clinic, I passed out on the floor and awoke with a team of nurses standing around me.
The doctors examining me found I had a very low heart rate and very low blood pressure. They explained that due to the stuffy conditions in the clinic, it had put a lot of pressure on my body, which had not yet adjusted to my weight loss.
Of course, none of that helped my acute embarrassment over what had just happened. At the Curragh, the final lesson I needed to know was about speed or pace. Normally on the gallops we exercise at a steady gallop at just over half racing speed. This is about 20 miles per hour. With my helmet camera I could measure the time between the furlong markers to give myself an idea of the speed I was travelling. 3 days before the race I got the chance to ride my horse at racing speed over a short distance. The speed needed for a national hunt race was about 14 seconds per furlong. Could I achieve this? Race day came, and before long I was in the parade ring and mounted, ready to go. My journey was nearly over. But this was a journey that had begun back in 2019, when I had trained for 6 months before the COVID pandemic had stopped the race both in 2020 and 2021. But I was determined to make it in 2022, and I recorded this footage back then in anticipation of going back to the gallops. But a week after filming this, my father, a lifelong racing fan, passed away. And 3 months after that, so too did my mother. Both had been ill for some time, and the grey clouds of grief blocked my path for the 2022 race. But now in 2023, a great determination had taken hold of me to get back in the saddle and have a go. On the course I stayed back from the main body of horses. For me it was a great privilege to be given a good racehorse, and as a novice rider I felt obliged to keep my horse safe and out of trouble of the main pack. But when we jumped off, I felt as if I had wings. As we passed the stands, a huge roar could be heard through the thunder of hooves. And my fitness held all the way to the end. I was beaten by 56 lengths, but that was no matter to me. Once I had looked out of cars like the ones before me with envy at the passing riders. A time from my youth that I had thought was long since past. But now, after great effort, I was looking back at those cars. I still ride out to this day, remembering W.B. Yeats' famous epitaph, which is an imperfect quatrain. It means there's a line missing. This line was only found in his papers after his death. And to me, this epitaph now makes sense, as in full it is: draw rein, draw breath, cast a cold eye on life, on death, horseman, pass by.